Good evening. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're learning Maseches Kiddushin Daf Lamed Beis. Today we're only going to be learning one blot. Tomorrow I'll record a shiur after Slichos and Shachris. After the 7 o'clock Slichos and Shachris, we'll record a shiur and post. That will be Lamed Gimel. And that way, on the first day of Rosh Hashanah, it's one blot. The second day of Rosh Hashanah, it's one blot. You may not care, but I care. So that's why we're doing this schedule. Monday is Sunday, and Monday is Tzom Gedalia. We'll still have shiur at night for those who are able to make it. It's really not many other options. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I'm out of town. I'll be recording and posting. And then Mir Hashem Shabbos, we're back together.
What are the times for Shabbos?
I have no idea.
It's in the,
In the 5:30s range, somewhere around there.
it was posted 5:40.
Whatever it is, it's correct.
5:40.
So 3 lines from the bottom. Let's get started. 3 lines from the bottom of Lamed Aleph, Lamed Beis. Again, many iconic Gemaras are found here in the Lameds and Maseches Kiddushin, and this one is about the details of properly respecting and fearing one's parents. Tanu Rabbanon, Ezu Mor ve'ezu Kibud. How do we define fearing a parent? Because the pasuk says, Ishimo ve'aviv tira'u. What's yira? Ve'ezu Kibud, because the pasuk says, Kabedes avicha ve'asimecha. So says the Gemara as follows: Mora lo omed b'makomo. If a father has a specific spot in which he stands, a specific area that's his, then you should not stand there. Lo yoshe b'makomo. You should not sit in your parents' chair. Lo soser es devarav. You should not argue with or object to what your father is saying. And v'lo machrio. You shouldn't even agree with your parent. Take a look at Rashi over here on the last line. V'lo machrio. Im haya aviv v'chacham. If your father is wise, v'chacham achar chilukim b'dvar halacha, and he says something about halacha. Lo yomar nirin divrei ploni. Oh yeah, I agree with my father. Let's say that someone in this room was dealing with isotopes, and my father, who happens to know about isotopes, says, you know what, technetium, whatever the drug is. And I'm like, you know what? He nailed it. Doc, you nailed it. So that's a chisaron in yira. That is not the right way to be. A person should just stay silent, and the father can earn his own respect. Kibud, how are we mechabed our parents? Ma'achel, we feed them. Umashka, we give them what to drink. Malbish, we dress them when we need to. Mechasa, we cover them when we need to. Machnes emotzi, we bring them in and we take them out. The Gemara wants to know, Mishel mi, on the top of Lamed Beis Amud Aleph, whose obligation is it to fund the mitzvah of Kibud Avayim? Do we say that if I need to take care of my father, I say, I'm happy to take care of you, but give me the credit card? Or no, is it my obligation to spend my money to perform that mitzvah? This is a machlokas amoraim. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda Omer Mishel Ben. He says it's the son who needs to pay. It's his mitzvah; he has to pay. Rav Nasan Bar Oshai Omer Mishel Ab. No, he says it's because he says that it's the father and not the son. The father's money can be used to service the father. Orule Rabban and the Rav Yirmiyah, ve'Amrei La Lebrei the Rav Yirmiyah, Kiman de Omer Mishel Ab. It seems like we paskin in Shulchan Aruch that I am not obligated to use my own money. I am obligated to take care of my father, but if there are expenses then I get to swipe dad's credit card, and then I'm able to take care of my parents. The Gemara has 3 possible rejections of these shitas, of whether or not it's father that has to fund his own care, or whether or not a son has to fund the care for his father. Here's question number 1 on Lamed Beis Amud Aleph, 4 lines down. Ne'emar kabedes avicha ve'etzimecha, v'ne'emar kabedes Hashem mehoncha, that you're supposed to give honor to Hashem from your own money. Maybe we should say ma'alahalan, just like by a Kadosh Baruch Hu, it's b'chesron kis. I'm about to spend an exorbitant amount of money on the Lulav Menesrogim. We're 4 bar mitzvah men and a chinuch set in my house. That's 5 sets. It's going to be $500. It's going to be crazy money. So if I have to serve a Kadosh Baruch Hu, it has to be mehoncha, it has to be for my own money. Maybe we should argue av kan with the mitzvah of kibud avim b'chesron kis and be amish mishal av my nafka lemine. If I have to only help my father with his money, no, that's not so bad. You know what? Maybe we should pay for 24-hour care with your credit card. Am I fulfilling the mitzvah of kibud avim? So that's what the Gemara is trying to figure out. It seems from this brisa that it has to come from your own pocket. Says the Gemara, even if the actual costs of tending to your father don't come from the child and they are coming from the pocket, but still, the child has to dedicate time to taking care of his father, and therefore, lebitul malacha, he'll end up losing income, right? So let's say that I have an opportunity, in theory, to do the mitzvah of kibud avim, not an opportunity. I have a scenario that comes up. My father needs my help, my mother needs my help, or I have a bris. So that's bitul malacha. So the chorah that I'm painting a picture. We're going to discuss this a little bit later. What? Use the circumcision example. Right. It may be different. It may be different. We'll see in a few minutes that it in fact may be different. It's true. Let's talk about a non-Jewish one. Not a ben yishma. It's a safek. That's all right. We have to get all the halachic loopholes. I had such an awful phone call. I had an awful phone call today. A father called me. He said, my wife and I are expecting a baby in a couple of months. Oh, wonderful. Nice to meet you. I asked this question, everyone Jewish status. Yeah, my wife is 100% Jewish. Her name is Yael. She's totally Israeli. I'm like, okay, done deal. However, my wife is not able to carry a baby. So we have hired a surrogate. Oh, okay. Is a surrogate a yid? Is a surrogate a goy? Surrogate's a goy. So I'm like, I can still perform the circumcision. There is one shita out there, Rav Asher Weiss holds this way, that when it comes to surrogacy, we follow the genetic material. Nobody else holds this way, basically. So I said, I can still do the circumcision, but I just can't make the blessings. And he said, I'm glad my wife is not on the phone. She would take personal offense to what you're saying. I said, I agree with you. I totally understand. In fact, when I first heard this question 10 years ago, I actually thought we followed genetic material. And there is an opinion like you too. It's just the minority opinion. He's like, so why can't you say the blessings? I said, well, either because the baby's not Jewish, or because it's a minority opinion versus a majority opinion, we have an element of suffix. And he's like, we could have this conversation all day, but I'm sure we're not going to get anywhere because I'm sure I'm not going to change your mind. I'm like, I was open. I'm like, I'm very uncomfortable because on the one hand, I share in your plight. I hear you, but at the same time, I'm stuck. You want me to make something up? I can't. I have to be honest with you. I'm not gonna break halach. I'm sorry. So uncomfortable. I said to them, I can do it l'shem gerus. He said, my wife would rather not have you do the circumcision. I said, I respect that. I understand.
Is Rabbi Weiss in Israel?
Rav Asher Weiss lives in Israel. Yeah. Okay, argument number 2, because we remember we're having a machlokes, is the mitzvah of kibud avayim from the money of the son or from the money of the father. So we have 8 lines down. Toshma beis achen shnei shutfen ha'avu bno harav v'talmido. Any structure, any partnership of brothers, any business partners, a father and a son, a rav and his talmid. Poden zeh lo zeh meiser sheni. We learned many days ago about meiser sheni, that if I'm going to be poden meiser sheni of my own, I have to add a chomesh. But if somebody else is poden my meiser sheni, no problem. So I'm allowed to be poden my father's meiser sheni, and he's allowed to be poden mine, no problem at all. And I can even feed my father with the meiser sheni that's mine. So it says the Gemara, if you want to say that I'm obligated to pay to take care of my father, so that's a problem. Because then I took my meiser sheni and I used it to tend to my father. But that's not the chiyuv. The chiyuv, according to this shita, is maybe it's the ben. If I have to use my own money and take care of my father, how then can I use meiser sheni money that's dedicated for anim and give it to my father? After all, my father's chiyuv come from my bank account. So the Gemara says, no, lo tzricha laha'adafa. There's a difference. The basics that I have to give my father do come from my own pocket, because perhaps I could argue that it's the mitzvah of the ben, Michel ben, to pay for the father. But let's say the average meal costs $7 and my father needs more, and that's $10. That can come from meiser ani. That meiser sheni, no problem at all. Hihachi says the Gemara, Hainu dikatani Allah. How do we understand the following brisa? That Amar Rav Yehuda tavo meira lemishamacheles aviv meiser sheni. If that's true, that we're allowed to use meiser sheni for meiser ani for ha'adafa, so why does the Gemara give a curse to someone who feeds their father with money from meiser ani? So the Gemara says a quarter of the way down, because ve'ila ha'adafa my nafkamina. After all, who cares? This is extra. He's using the meiser ani. There should be nothing wrong with it at all. The Gemara says v'afilu hachi zila be milsa. It's a zilzal for the father to get funded from meiser ani through his son. It's not as pasnished. If the father needs help and he doesn't have a son, or the son, he doesn't want to embarrass himself, he'll go to the Chicago Chesed Fund. He'll go somewhere and he'll get what he needs. But to go through his son, that's zila be milsa. So we tried twice to reject an answer. We're not able to do that. Let's move on to our third question, a third of the way down. On Lamed Beis Madav Tashma, Shalu es Rabbi Elazar, Ad Hechan Kibud Avayim. How far does the mitzvah of Kibud Avayim go? Amar Lehem Kadesh Yitol Arniki V'Yizrekenu Liyam Befana Ve'enu Machlimo. That if a father takes his son's wallet and throws it into the water in front of him, and the son does nothing. I was thinking about this when I read this Gemara, that 2 weeks ago when we were in Camp Shai, we all went boating. We went tubing. If I took my son's phone and just gently tossed it in the water, never to be found again, what would my son's reaction be? Now, he's a normal 23 kid. I'm a normal 20. I'd freak out. But what are you doing? You owe me $1,000 for my iPhone, Eno machlimo, zip, nothing. That's the mitzvah of kibbud avim. That's the upper, it's a high limit. Huh?
Yeah,
Adecha. It's an upper limit. It's not, you still can fulfill the mitzvah of kibbud avim with lower things, but that's how far the mitzvah requires us to go. And says the Gemara, if this is true, then why does that make sense to say that it's mishal av? My nafka le'mini, let my father throw his money in the water. If my father throws his own money in the water, you want me to be eno machlimo? Elamai, maybe it should just be that it's from the son. Says the Gemara, no, it could be the father's money, but biroi liyorsho. But I know that if my father were to take one of the gold bars from the basement, and he's like, just tossing it overboard one at a time, eno machlimo. It's his money. I know, but I'm a yorish, so therefore I might say like, no, don't do that. Eno machlimo. You have to say nothing. There was a story that had some similarities to this. The Rav Huna kara shirai ba'anpei Rabba berei. He tore a silk chashuv garment in front of his son Rabba. Amar, he said, Ezel ichsi irasach ilo rasach. I want to see if my son gets angry or not. I'm testing my son, a litmus test. Is my son going to freak out? What is his level of kibbud avim? Halfway down, the Gemara says, V'dilma rasach, if you make him angry, v'kaver alif ne'iver lo sitin michshol. If the father is going to do something that's going to make the son curse out his father, yell at his father, hit his father, so then maybe if I'm the father and I'm tearing the garment, I'm causing my son to do that avera. That's lifnei iver lo sitin michshol, because I'm not allowed to create a stumbling block for my child or for anyone for that matter. Says the Gemara, no, the machil le likre. It's something that is actually what's the machil le mikre?
We're going to waive the honor due.
What? What'd you say?
Waive the honor due.
Oh, you're saying sorry, right. So what does that mean? That the father was machil likre, that the father was able to overlook. Says the Gemara, v'haka'avar mishum bal tashchis. The Gemara says, but wait 1 second, you're ruining a garment. Says the Gemara, da'avad le b'pumbiani, that you tore them on the seams. Well, says the Gemara, if the son doesn't get angry, that perhaps it's the case that the reason why the son doesn't get angry is because nothing happened new. You'll take it back to the tailor, it'll stitch it up on the seam, no foul, everything's fine. Says the Gemara, the father was testing him b'shas rische when he was already angry, and we assume that he was already angry, and he'll therefore get angrier. That was the test. Now we're going to learn a sugya about how a child can speak to a parent if the parent makes an error. Okay. My daughter did this to me tonight, actually. So I told her, I'm like, did you learn Daf Yomi tonight? She said, no. I said, you should probably learn Daf Yomi tonight. Yeah. You want to come with me? She's 11. So it says the Gemara, Masni la Rabbi Cheskel Rami Berei. Rabbi Cheskel asked a question to his son, and his son's going to retort and do it incorrectly. Says the Gemara, Hanisrafim b'niskalim. If there are people who are chayiv sreifa and people who are chayiv skila, and they get mixed up together, and we don't know who gets which punishment, Reb Shimon Omer yaduna b'skila, we need to do skila, she'asreifa chamura, because sreifa is a more chamur punishment. Skila is a lesser punishment, and we're not allowed to just upgrade everyone to a higher punishment. That's not right to the people who are for sreifa. So therefore, Reb Shimon was of the opinion that the sreifa is chamura, and everybody gets skila. Amar le Rabbi Yehuda Berei. His son says back to him, Abba, lo tisne hachi. You should not teach the Mishnah like that. Very strong language to his father. My iria sreifa chamura. Who cares about whether or not we hold that sreifa is more chamur than skila? Tepakle, perhaps we can say deruba niskalin ninu, that most people were to be niskal, and we just follow the rove, and it happens to be that the rove is the lesser of the two evils. Elahachi isne. Really, Dad, this is what you should said. Haniskalin be nisrafin. We should reverse it, that the niskalan got mixed up in the nisrafin. So Amar Le, the father says, Yihachi, I don't understand the end. There, the end, that doesn't work for the end, because it seems to be that the skila is more chamor, according to the chachamim, that the skila is more chamor than the sreifa. The father says back to the son, my area the skila chamura. Typically, if you're right, my son, we should follow the principle that you said, the ruba nisrafim ninu. And it's not, it doesn't say that in the seifa. So obviously you're wrong about the fact that there's a rove. Amarle, the son said, Hasam Rabbanan hu deka'amr le Reb Shimon, deka'amr sreifa chamura. No, the chachamim were just responding to Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon had said that sreifa is chamura. The chachamim were arguing that it wasn't chamura. Now, this sugya aside, what we're looking at is the language that the son used with the father. And the Gemara says 3/4 of the way down, Amar le Shmuel le Rabbi Yehuda. Shmuel says to Rabbi Yehuda, we have a problem, Shinnon, a sharp one, lo tema le la'avu chachi. You should not speak to your father this way. The Tanya, we have a brisa. Hareshahaya aviv over al divrei Torah al yomar lo. If there's a father who did something wrong, the child should not say Abba avart al divrei Torah. You violated Jewish law. You should not say that to your father. Ella omer lo. What you should say is Abba kach kasu b'Torah. One step removed. Meaning, I'm not telling you that you're an avaryan. I'm just going to tell you. By the way, there's a pasuk that says Basar v'sad treifa lo sochel. You're not allowed to eat treif. Kach kasu b'Torah. That's what's written in the Torah. If you say that, you can't say that to your father. If you say to your father after he eats a treif steak that basar v'sad treifa lo sochelu lo sochlu kol nevelo, whatever the isser is, so then tzeuri kamitzarle, then you're hurting your father, and that's also not allowed. So what's the right way for a son to rebuke a child? Omer lo, and this is quoted in Shulchan Aruch. Abba mikra kasu b'Torah kach. There's a pasuk in Chumash that reads like this. It's a little bit of a difficult answer, honestly, because it's not much different than the previous line. The previous line that we just rejected was Abba kach kasu b'Torah, and here what we're saying is Abba mikra kasu b'Torah kach. I would not have distinguished between those two lines. They sound nearly identical. And while I don't appreciate the difference over here, I think that we are able to distinguish and come up with our own distinctions of what the right way is to say such a thing. Okay, that's the din in Shulchan Aruch. Not easy to fulfill. Not easy. Elazar ben Masya Omer, he says, let's say Abba Omer Hashkini Maim mitzvah lasos. My father asks me to get him a cup of water, and at the same time, there's a mitzvah to happen. My father asks me right now to get him a cup of water. I'm in the process of teaching Torah, a mitzvah of Talmud Torah. So what should I do? So the Gemara says, Maniach ani kavod Abba. I need to not give my father the cup of water. Ve'osa es ha-mitzvah. And I need to do the mitzvah that I'm doing right now. Shani ve'Abba chayavin b'mitzvah. Because both me and my father have a greater chiyuv to the learning. More than I have a singular chiyuv to my father and I both have a chiyuv to learn. So therefore, under these circumstances, it's not appropriate to get water for my father if he asks. Isi ben Yehuda Omer im efshar lemitzvah le'asos al yedei acherim. If somebody else can take over for the mitzvah that you're doing, te'asa al yedei acherim v'yelechu b'chvod aviv. If it's possible, you should have someone else do the mitzvah. Like, let's say I have somebody fill in for what I'm doing, or whatever the case may be, and then the Gemara says we should try and chaperaining and do both. Amar Rav Masna halacha ki Isi ben Yehuda. First of the very long lines, we seem to paskin like Isi ben Yehuda, who's of the opinion that we try to do both. So in a case like this, if my father says, please get me a cup of water, I can ask someone, can you cover the next 5 lines while I go get a cup of water? That would be the ideal way to do it. If there is no one to do the mitzvah that I'm doing, then I would have to tell my father uncomfortably, I'm sorry, I can't help you right now. Amar of Yitzchak bar Shila, Amar of Masna, Amar of Chizda. Ha'av shemachal al kvodo, kvodo machal. A father who is mochel on his kavod. If he says, right, remember what we said, what kavod is. Kavod is machil, mashke, malbish, mechas, and machnis motzi, all the things on the bottom. A father says, I don't want you to walk me into the house. I don't want you to feed me. So then the din is that a father is allowed to be mochel on his kavod. So Shaila and Poskim, I know people like this who call their fathers by their first names. Totally asur. But what if a father is mochel on his kavod? Really, that's yira. Is mochel on kavod also an extension to the world of yira? I'm asking. I don't know. Just saying it. I know people who do this. It's shocking to me because where I grew up, we never were able. Forget my parents. That's pasha. But like even my parents' friends were always Mr. Mrs. Rabbi Rabbits, and we were never allowed to call anyone by their first name. So this is foreign to me, but I've seen it before. If a father is mochel, so then then his kavod is mochel. However, harav shemachal al kvodo ein kvodo mochel. Let's say Rabbi Robinson, Rabbi Schechter, they say, please call me by my first name. No, they're not allowed to do that. For Rav Yosef Amar, that's not true. Afilu harav shemachal al kvodo mochel. A Rav is allowed to say that you can call me by this name. When I was in NCSY, almost all of the rabbinic staff, there was rabbi followed by their first name, almost everyone. That's not a normal way to talk to a rabbi. I would never do that to a Talmud Chacham, to a Rav. None of us qualified, but it didn't matter. We were all machal, nobody cared. It was the culture.
I shouldn't call you Phil?
What?
I shouldn't call you Phil, I should call you Rav Phil, and stand up for you.
Rav Yosef Amar, afilu harav shemachal al kvodo machal. Ready? Watch this. If we paskin like this, and we do, I can tell you, you have no need to stand up for me ever, and please don't. This is awesome. And also, you can call me Phil, and you should. Shneimar v'Hashem holech lifnehem yomam. We learn from a Kadosh Baruch Hu that a Kadosh Baruch Hu walked in front with the Anani HaKavod. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Hachi Hashta. What kind of comparisons did you bring a pasuk about Hashem to teach me about Mechilas Kvod of a Rav? Says the Gemara, Hasam Kadosh Baruch Hu Alma Dilehu v'Torah Dilehu. By a Kadosh Baruch Hu, the world is his and the Torah is his, and therefore Machile Likra, he can be Machal on his own Kavod. But turning to the top, Alamid Beis, Amid Beis, we'll be heading to the top, Alamid Gimel, Alamid Aleph Hacha. Torah dilehu, by a human being, would we ever say that the Torah is his, that he can be machal? A Rav is representative of Torah. We have Rabbanim in our shul, Rabbanim in our community. They're representative of Torah. You don't stand up for the rabbi, you stand up for the Torah that they've learned. So says the Gemara, how can you learn from a Kadosh Baruch Hu when the Torah doesn't belong to man? So famously, the first parak of Tehillim, Hadar Amar Rava in, yes, Torah dilehu dechsivu v'saraso yehkei yomam v'layla. Right, that's look at the language. It was so in his own Torah, not Hashem's. In the Torah that any one of us learns, if he's Yega Yomam V'Layla, the Torah becomes his. Any, can you really say that Rava was of the opinion that the Torah belongs to a person? Rava, I should say, that Mechilas Kavod can happen for a Rav. The Harava Mashki Behilula Debre. He was pouring out drinks at his son's wedding. He poured a lachaim, he poured some wine for these two Amoraim, for Rav Papa and Rav Huna Bered Rav Yeshua, and they stood up. The Rav Mari Rav Pinchas Bered Rav Chizda, he poured for these two people, and Velo Kamu Mikame, they didn't stand up. In Ikpid, he was makbid. He wasn't makbid because of his own kavod. He was makbid because Lechora, he held that a Rav is not allowed to be mochel on his kavod. So we have a stira within Rava. Amar, and Rava piped up and said, Hanu Rabbanon Rabbanon. V'hanu Rabbanon, Lav Rabbanon. I don't understand. Some of you guys keep halacha, some of you don't keep halacha. There's no mechilas kavod by a Rav. The fact that I'm machil is completely irrelevant to what you think. It doesn't matter. You need to do what's right. And if you're a Rav, then you should stand up for that person. We don't paskin like Rav, but that's what he said. And furthermore, at another episode, the Gemara says 8 lines down on Lamed Beis and Beis, Rav Papa have a mashke behilula de Abba Marberei. Rav Papa was pouring drinks at the behilula at the wedding of Abba Marberei. And Vidali lekasa Rav Yitzchak Bered Rav Yehuda, he poured a cup for him. V'kamekame, v'lo kamekame, v'ikbid, same exact thing. So what is it? Do we say that a Rav can be mochel on his kavod? Yes or no? Says the Gemara, afilu hachi. Even though it's true that a Rav can be mochel on his kavod, that's how we paskin. Hidur me'evad lebo. They still should have done something that showed that there was a little bit of kavod there. This is what we do. We kind of sort of stand up in our seats. It's really not appropriate if the person is not, if we don't otherwise know that a Rav is mochel on his kavod, just popping out of your seat a little bit is not right. You should stand up properly. And we're going to see some parameters on this in a minute. And even according to the lenient opinion, the one that we paskin like that, if a Rav is mochel on his kavod, then his kavod is machal. But nasi shemachal al kvodo ein kvodo machal. But a nasi, someone who's a leader of the generation, he has no mechilas kavod. That's not allowed. I was wondering if this applies to a Rosh Bezdin. Does it apply to the post Kehair? Let's talk about Rabbi Rees, Rabbi First. They actually both happen to be in Batei Din. But is there a difference between them? Are they Nisim? Do we have a halachic status of a Nasi? I'm probably not. I'm just guessing. I have no idea. But questions to be asked. Quarter of the way down, Meisvei, let's ask on this. Ma'aseh Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yoshua, Rabbi Tzadok, Shem Musubin Bebeis Hamishta, Ben Osher, Rabban Gamliel. They were at a party and Rabban Gamliel was there. Rabban Gamliel, he was the greatest of them all by far. Omedu Mashke Aleim, he was standing there pouring l'chaims. Nosan Hakos, Rabbi Lazar, below Natlo. He was so. Could you imagine, like the biggest Talmud Chacham you know, handing you a cup of wine? We'd probably accept it because we were uncomfortable not accepting it, but this first person, Rabbi Eliezer, couldn't handle accepting it. Velo Natalia didn't touch it. Nashna Rabbi Yoshua v'kiblo. Rabbi Yoshua was like, sure, l'chaim tovim u'l'shalom, and he grabs a cup of wine out of his hands. Amal Rabbi Lazar, Mazid Yoshua, what are you doing? How could you take a drink out of Rabban Gamliel's hand? He's the gadol ador. You're a little nothing. Says the Gemara, Anu Yoshvin Rabban Gamliel Rabbi Omedu Mashke Aleinu. Amarle, Matzinu Gadol Mimenu Sheshimesh. We have someone who did a greater service. Avram Gadol Hadoraya, V'chasu Bo, who made Alehem. He was serving the guests that he had at his house, the ones who were Mavaser, the 3 Besoros. So it says the Gemara halfway down, maybe it's because they appeared to Malachi Ashar. Says the Gemara, that's not true. Lo Nidmulo Ela La'aravim. He didn't know anything different. He looked like regular Arabs. He still took care of them, no problem at all. So what do we see over here? That Avraham is allowed to feed someone, and he was seemingly a nasi, something high level, because he's being brought here. So says the Gemara, Avraham was like that. But Anan, Why can't Rabbi Gamliel give us drinks? Why can't we take them? Amar lahem Rabbi Tzadok ad masai atem manichim kavodo shel makom v'atem oskim b'chavad abrios. You guys are ignoring the obvious. The Kodesh Baruch Hu b'chavodu v'atzmo did more than that. Kodesh Baruch Hu mashiv ruchos. He blows the wind. U'ma'ale nesiyim. He brings clouds. U'morid matar. He makes it rain. U'matzmiach adam. And makes the ground grow. V'orach shulchan. He prepares everything in the world. Lifnei kol echad v'echad. And we take from him. V'anu lo yehei Rabban Gamliel b'Rebbe omed u'mashke aleinu. You got shot wrong. That's not correct. Ella says the Gemara. It must be that if Rav Ashi was saying anything, it must be this. 2/3 of the way down. That even if we say that a nasi who tried to be mochel on his kavod, that it worked, that there was mechilas kavod, but melech shemochal al kavodo ein kavodo mochel shenemar som tasim alecha melech shetehei a maso alecha. When it comes to a king, there's nothing to talk about. When it comes to a king, he's not allowed to be mochel on his kavod at all. Always treated with the highest respects. Let's talk about standing up for old people. This is the next sugya, the 2 dots, 3/4 of the way down. I'm going to read the whole pasuk because we're going to be analyzing both parts. It's just healthy to hear the whole thing in one shot. The pasuk says in Sefer Vayikra, "Mipnei seva takum v'hadarta pnei zaken ve'eres emelokecha ani Hashem." 3 parts. Mipnei seva takum is number 1. V'hadarta pnei zaken. You should turn to the face of a zaken, and ve'eres emelokecha ani Hashem. So let's analyze the Gemara. Tana Rabbanon at the 2 dots. Mipnei seva takum, that we have to stand before an older person. Yachal afilu man zaken ashmai. Is this true? Even if the zaken is guilty, even if he's a rasha, Talmud lomar zaken, that zaken implies a high quality person, not a low quality person. An older person is only considered to be part of Mipnei Seva Takum if he's a chacham. Shneimar esveli shivim ish mi ziknei Yisrael. Who are these 70 people? They were Sanhedrin, and the word zikanim is there. We are at these weddings all the time. We stand up seemingly for everyone who walks down the aisle. It doesn't matter who they are. They could be the flower girl. Everybody's up on their feet. Lamaisa, if that person, based on the Gemara so far, if that person is not from, whatever the case may be, doesn't mean you shouldn't stand up. It just means there's no chiyuv to stand up for that person. The chiyuv is for a chacham. Rabbi Yossi Aglili gives a very similar answer, an answer of splitting hairs, and we'll get back to this to find out the difference. Omer, he says, Ein zaken el mishakana chachma. It's not about ziknei Yisrael, it's about someone who acquired chachma. We'll see soon, even if he's not a zaken. Says the Gemara, Shneimar Hashem kanani reishi starko. It's about being wise. Says the Gemara, Yachal Yamod mipanav mimakom rachok. Maybe I can stand up for a chash of Talmud Chacham from very far away. Talmud lomar takum vehadarta. Lo amarti kima ela b'makom sheyesh hidur. It has to be in a place where there's hidur. You have to be near the person. We know in Shulchan Aruch it's within Dalet Amos. That's really when there's a chiyuv. So that's really how it works out. That's not found here in this Gemara, but that is true. Yachal yahadrena b'mamon. Maybe we should give him money if we respect him. A little bit of an oddball question, but the Gemara does recommend it. Tamalama takum v'adarta makima she'ein bo chesron kis. Just like standing up doesn't cost money. Av hidur, the hidur that we need to treat this person with is she'ein bo chesron kis. Yachol yamod mipana mibeis hakis mibeis hamerchas. Let's say that you're sitting on one of the benches in the mikvah. You're sitting on the benches in a bathroom, in a larger bathroom, and the Talmud Chacham walks in. Do you stand up? So says the Gemara, no. Talmud lomar takum v'hadarta. Lo amarti kima ela b'makom sheyesh hidur. In a bathroom, it's not a makom hidur. You don't have to stand up for a rav in a bathroom. Also quoted in Shulchan Aruch. We do this sometimes socially when we don't really want to talk to someone. We just look away, we close our eyes, we pretend like we didn't see them. I do this in Jewel every single week. It's fantastic. So the Gemara wants to know, what if I see a Talmud Chacham walking my way and I close my eyes just to not see him? So the din is that doesn't work. Talmud lomar takum v'yaresa, because the pasuk says that you should have yira. And says the Gemara, davar hamasr lelev. That one has to do with your heart. You know exactly what you saw, and therefore ne'amar bo v'yaresa me'elokecha, to remind you that the fact that you saw it and you're the one who knows what's right and what's wrong, you can't close your eyes. That doesn't work. By the way, sidebar, but true. Atzimas Enaim also doesn't work for pritzus. The halacha is that if you want to make a bracha with Hashem's name, there can be no one in your field of vision who's not dressed properly. And that means that even Atzimas Enaim, closing your eyes, does not work. So let's say a person's in a mall or on an airplane and there's people around that are not dressed properly. And not dressed properly is a very high standard. It's a tefach of erva. So closing your eyes does not work. So this shiloh's come up at Shabbos tables all the time. People come over, they don't know any better. They're not covered properly. So you really should look down so that even when your eyes are open, you can't see that person. Otherwise, you have a big problem. Atzimas Enaim doesn't work for not standing up, and it doesn't work for pritzus either. Says the Gemara, 7 lines from the bottom. Reb Shimon ben Elazar Omer minayin lezaken shelo yatriach. How do we know that a zaken should try not to bother people? Namely, if a Rav can, let's say a Rav walked into this room to sit and learn, he could sit what is now the women's section over here, or he can come sit over here. He should go sit over there. He should not be matriach the room if he can avoid it. Shene'emar Talmud Lomar Zaken v'Aresa, because the pasuk says Zaken and v'Aresa, then you should have fear of a Kadosh Baruch Hu. This isn't about you, and you shouldn't be making people standing up if you can avoid it. He disagrees. He says anyone who is older, they should be stood up for. This is quoted in Shulchan Aruch that we stand up for old people. Period. Seemingly, even if they're a Russia. Rabbi Yossi Aglili Hainu Tanakama. Earlier, I mentioned this question that Rabbi Yossi Aglili and the Tanakama had very similar languages. We initially had asked, "Hey, wait 1 second. What if the old man is a Rasha?" So the Tanakama was of the opinion that it has to be a Chacham. Rabbi Yossi was of the opinion that it has to be let me say again. The Tanakama was of the opinion that he has to be a Zaken. He has to have some Chachma as a Zaken. Rabbi Yossi Aglili that a different language. It has to be someone who is Kana Chachma. Once you've acquired Chachma, then you're Begeder, an old person. And Rabbi Yossi Aglili Hainu Tanakama, the Gemara says, Ika beinahu yonik v'chacham. If you have someone who's v'chakim, you have someone who's very young and they're very wise. That's why there's this guy, the massive Talmud Chacham, they call him the Yanuka. You've heard about this guy. This is the language of the Gemara. The Yanuka is a very young Talmud Chacham. So the Gemara says that's the nafkamina between them. Tanakama savar yonik v'chakim lo. If a person is young and wise, that's not enough. He's not a zaken. He has to be older. Rabbi Yossi Aglili savar afidu yonik v'chakim. If a person is young but very wise, he too is someone that has to be stood up for. My time the Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Why does Rabbi Yossi Aglili say that even if he's young? Because Amar Lach Yisal Kadaitach Kedamar Tanakama. If you want to say like the Tanakama that he actually has to be old, Imkein Nichtov Rachmanim Ibnei Seva Zaken Takum V'Adar. You should say Zaken in the beginning. Why did you separate Zaken from the first part of the pasuk from the second? Ma'ishna de palginu rachmana. The meimar the high lav high v'high lav high shma mina afilu yonik v'chakim. That's why Rabbi Yossi Aglili says it has to be that a young person who's wise, that person is begeder mipnei seva takum, because the pasuk doesn't say mipnei seva zaken takum. The Tanakama. What about the Tanakama? Why does he hold the way that he does to say that the person has to be old? Mishum debayla mismach zaken v'aresa, because of the way we learn the pasuk. It has the word zaken and it has the word year in the same pasuk, and therefore. The Gemara says that even if a person is only if a person is old is he going to be considered worthy of standing up for. I think there's a machlokas 60 or 70. I think it's a machlokas in the Gemara. No. What? No. Let's look in the Rishonim here. I didn't look this up, but I think the answer is 60 or 70. I think it's a machlokas Tanaim somewhere. Let's see. No. Don't know, but pretty sure it's a machlokas. Okay, good question. The Tanakama, my taima. According to the Tanakama, what would he say about this? The reason why the Tanakama doesn't hold the Rav Yossi Aglili that a young person who is wise should be stood up for is because imken nichtov rachmana mipnei seva takum v'hadarta pnei zaken. You should have broken up the pasuk that way, which is the takum should have been listed for two different people. What we see from here is that really that they are one thing, namely that if a person is young and wise, then he is worthy for people to stand up for him. We'll stop right here. We'll pick up tomorrow after the 7 o'clock Slichos Shacharis, probably 8:30, 9 o'clock, whatever it's going to be. It's going to be pretty late. After we'll do a little Taras Nadarim, and then we'll do this. All right, we'll stop right here. Wishing you all a beautiful night.